Auditing firm KPMG today released its second Africa Fraud Barometer, which found that reported cases of fraud decreased from 520 in the second half of 2011 to 503 cases in the first half of 2012. In the same period, the value of fraud decreased from $3 to $2 billion. Joining me now to unpack the findings of the report is Petrus. He's KPMG's Africa leader on forensics. Petrus, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Karema.
Very interesting findings here. Of course, countries like Nigeria, Zimbabwe, South Africa leading in terms of corruption. Break it down for us. Who are the worst, culprits when it comes to corruption on the continent and fraud?
Karema, from a perpetrator point of view, our survey indicated that the biggest risk emanates from government officials and employees within organizations. So we're dealing with a situation which is not unusual from a global point of view, where the risk comes from within organizations, people that understand the processes, that understand the business, and they seem to be the ones that find it the easiest to perpetrate the frauds and commit the offences.
But now if we look at countries, if you're comparing, for example, places like South Africa, Nigeria, what is your study finding? How do the largest economy compare, for example, to the second largest economy when it comes to fraud cases?
Well, we had, and I just must emphasize, these are fraud cases reported in the print media because we don't have consistent government-released stats from each of the countries. But the four spikes were South Africa, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. And even within their sub-regions, they were significantly higher than their neighboring countries. And so that does beg certain questions, and sometimes it could be the relative size of the economy, for example, in the South African example. But with the Central African countries, Zimbabwe surprised me. Why should Zimbabwe be so much higher than, say, Zambia?
If one looks at the findings, your report states that there are more reported cases of fraud in South Africa, but if one looks at the value of those cases, say compared to Nigeria, you would find it's much higher in a place like Nigeria. What accounts for that kind of differentiation?
It's difficult to be absolutely specific. Speaking to our Nigerian colleagues, I think that one of the contributors is the areas within which, or the sectors within which the frauds are taking place. And in Nigeria, it seems to be quite heavily dominated by the extractive industries, oil and gas, and
your resource curse,
and also government. And it's a bigger pie. It's the contracts are bigger, the amounts available are bigger, as opposed to one would find in Zimbabwe, where we're seeing also quite a high spike in the incidence of fraud. The value per fraud seems to be lower. It seems to be, and one can attribute that more to general economic pressure being felt amongst the citizens of the country.
Now, you did make reference to the fact that this survey refers to reported incidents in the media.
Yes.
How central is the media to exposing fraud and corruption, and can one use that as some kind of indicator on how free people are to either report corruption or to take action against, fraud?
It is extremely important, based on my years of experience in the sort of the fraud market from the other side of the fence. The media has an extremely important role to play in fleshing out and identifying issues that need to be subjected to public scrutiny. I think the reluctance or the willingness to report is in the countries that we surveyed has less to do with the levels of freedom in the press, because we can't say that there are particular countries where the scores are low because the press is not free to report. I think it relates more to a cultural willingness to speak out, blow the whistle, or to just ignore it and look the other way.
Are you able, from the study, to quantify in financial terms and economic terms what fraud or incidence of fraud is impacting, how it's impacting on the economy? We saw that there is a decrease from 3 to 2 billion, but what is the financial implications of this study? Look,
from the media that we surveyed, the sum total here was only about between 2 and 3 billion for the countries surveyed. I think that is just a fraction. If one looks at your more economically focused surveys, the calculated cost of fraud and corruption is in the tens of billions to the general African economy, because there is such a huge quantity of fraud and corruption that is not reported, and particularly in certain industries. I think one can safely say that, using the financial services industry as an example, much of what they are subjected to never sees the light of day because it gets handled internally, and why shine a spotlight on yourself?
Now, if we look at the figure shows that 18% of corruption is to be found in government officials, with business quite a close second at 15%. But there is, of course, a nexus between government and business people when corruption happens. For every corrupt politician, there's some business person offering the bribe. What does this study show about the kind of genesis of corruption between an enabler, and a government official?
I think the point that you make about there always being two parties is a direct contributor to the low level of reporting and detection of corruption. It's the victim often doesn't know that they're a victim. It's a government that is contracting on a proposal that is not the cheapest proposal or doesn't offer the highest quality. It doesn't necessarily know that. The difficulty with corruption is both the giver and the receiver are criminals. And so they look out for each other. They're not going to break ranks easily. And so it is incredibly underreported generally, despite the significance of the amounts involved.